Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. This is Bishop Brian Willett coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains on this September 20th, 2019 for a brand new edition of Vestiges After Dark. Tonight, it's Take Your Questions. We get so many questions from social media every single day. Many of them require a response more than what Twitter allows. So today we're going to be going over some of those questions and giving you the answers that these questions deserve. And we've got some good subjects for tonight. Numerology, the keeping of ashes, which was a big topic today, and many other interesting areas of concern that came in through the last several months. So don't go away. Take care. Thank you all for joining me this evening on this edition of Vestiges After Dark. I hope my sound is good. Every time the studio updates the software, we get our settings completely reset. So I know that we've had sound issues in the past, and I don't have an engineer here to kind of help me with that. So I need all of you to kind of tell me if you're having issues. So let me know throughout the broadcast. Just let me know in the chat room. Go ahead and log in on the chat so that we can communicate. And I can even take some of your questions through the chat room. Sister Maximilian and Sister Mary Joan are here tonight, and they will both be watching the chat for any questions coming in. As time allows, we'll answer them. So let's go ahead and bring Sister Mary Joan on. Sister Mary Joan, how are you doing tonight?
Good evening, all. I'm doing fine. Hope everyone's well.
Fantastic. How is Sister Mary Joan's sound? Is everybody can everyone hear Sister Mary Joan very well? I hope. Just go ahead and let me know if there's any issues. Like I said, I don't trust the settings anymore. But hopefully, she's coming through loud and clear as well. The integration with Skype has always been a problem. But overall, Spreaker is still the best podcasting service that I currently have access to. So glad to hear it. It sounds like you're good, Sister Mary Joan. So I think we can begin the show. So, as you all know, there's been so much going on, and I do apologize that we planned to have more episodes than this over the summer. It just did not materialize. The schedule has been very hectic. There's been a lot going on. We just shot another Ghost Adventures, as you all know, or many of you know, I think, through social media. And we've got some cases coming up that we're going to be going to out of state. Lots of activity. So it's hard to really pin down dates and make these podcasts happen. But rest assured, we'll always make an effort. My goal is to try to get one a month out, but that just hasn't been possible over the last several months because of, again, schedule conflicts and whatnot. But, we'll continue to do Vestiges After Dark as time allows. It just won't be as regular as it used to be. So, I think you all know the Mission Church has now officially closed. That's something that was open, obviously, when we did our last episode and is no longer the case. And I want everyone to be very clear on what's happening now. I know that a lot of you have been loyal benefactors of the church that have kept the Mission Church going. We did some fundraisers several months ago to save the Mission Church. And, we thought we almost did. The money coming in and the pledges that we received would have been enough to satisfy the financial requirements of keeping the Mission Church going. Unfortunately, though, more than you can possibly imagine, those pledges were not actually, people didn't live up to them. We would get maybe money for the first month or the second month, and then all of a sudden the pledge would just go dead, and no one would explain to us why they were no longer supporting it. They would cancel the automatic payments without notice. They wouldn't tell us why. And because of that, and because so many people did that, and some were actually major benefactors, people that were donating larger sums, so they had a more significant impact on the overall budget that we were trying to develop with that fundraiser. It just was not feasible to keep it going anymore. Not to mention that it was never in an ideal location. We always had noise issues. The management did not really do much to help us to resolve those. They would say that they were, but they weren't really actively taking a role in making sure that our business was not being impacted by the other tenants who were doing some pretty wild and crazy things. Sister Mary Joan, and I know you had to go next door a few times and knock on the door. We would, one of the tenants next to us had a big sign on, just like a handwritten note sign on the window with trash bags up that covered the window so you couldn't see what was going on inside. And it just said, soap by appointment. But when you'd be in there at night, sometimes as late as 9 or 10 o'clock p.m., you would hear blasting music, people yelling and screaming, and all sorts of crazy things going on. And Sister Mary Joan went over there one time to quiet them down, and they were basically doing, what was it, jujitsu or something?
Yeah, they were practicing jujitsu, and I know they were because I'm a practitioner myself. So I walk over there, and I'm like, okay, this is definitely not soap. They had rubber mats out, and they were doing mounting and guard techniques. There's about 6 or 7 of them in there. So
yeah, and
not one piece of soap to be found.
And so there were things like that going in. They were coming in under false pretenses. The management, wasn't doing anything about that. And, we were only asking for a 2-hour block once or twice a week to do our liturgies. And then, on occasion we would have interview dates where we would see clients. But, we weren't there very much. We were paying, full-time service to have that location, but we weren't really even using it on a full-time basis. It was just a few days a week. And all we were asking for is, at night, can you be quiet? It wasn't really, I don't think it was a tall order. It wasn't like we were going in there during business hours and expecting them to be quiet. It was always after normal business hours. Our masses were always late, usually 8 p.m., when we would have a vigil mass or something. So it should have worked. People were just not wanting to cooperate, and it was miserable. So there were other factors involved. But when I saw that people weren't even living up to their pledges, there was just no way we were going to be able to stay in that location. It was not worth it. And, and lastly, and it's sad to say, it wasn't really being properly utilized. The whole point of the place was to be a spiritual hospital so that people in the local Atlanta area would have a place to come to recover from a spiritual crisis that we helped them resolve. But people would come, they'd get their resolution, and then we'd never see them again. And so, this was something that was a regular issue that we would deal with. And so that's why the Mission Church is no longer operational. But I ask you all to please continue to support the ministry, because that is still operational. And now the monies that we were collecting to pay for the Mission Church, we are now redistributing in full 100% towards a travel budget to take the most extreme cases in our queue that are out of state. So we have a lot of cases. We have hundreds of cases, more than we could possibly ever get to. Some of them are malingerers. Some of them are most likely going to be psychological illness. And so, we have to kind of sift through that using our expertise to try to, look for those key things, those key factors in the intakes that would lead us to believe, or lend credibility, rather, is what I was trying to say, to the cases themselves, so that we're not going to invest, $2,000 to go and investigate a case that turns out to be fraudulent. So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take those resources and travel more. And so typically we will need somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 travel budget for each case. And when the coffers are too low, we will just simply not take out-of-state cases until there's enough money to pay for the next one. And then when the money's there, we'll go on another case. So it gives us a little bit more control over our budget rather than what the Mission Church required, where we had a flat, fee that we had to pay every month, rent, we had to pay utilities. All of these things were set prices. And so there was no flexibility. If we didn't have the money one month, too bad. You have to pay it anyway if you want to keep the place. So now we have a little bit of control, and I'm hoping that all of you who believe in this ministry have benefited from the knowledge and data that we share on social media, also through this podcast. I'm hoping that you will be inspired to send some money to this ministry so that we can continue to help as many people as possible. You do that by going to Nicolaitan.org or esotericcatholic.org. They're both the same website. And just click on the donation button on the right-hand side of the page, and you can enter in any amount that you like. What we really need, though, is monthly support. So if you can click the monthly option so that you can, give the same amount every month, that would be most ideal, so that we can continue to help as many people as possible. And like I said, each case costs between $1,000 and $2,000, depending upon where we have to go and how long we have to be there. So, if everybody on my Facebook gave 10 cents, we'd be all set. Unfortunately, even with 13.3 thousand followers, we get considerably limited support for this ministry. And like I said, if all of those 13.3 thousand followers just gave a dime every month, we would have enough money to pretty much take all of our extreme cases and then some. So hopefully you'll give more than a dime. Hopefully this content is worth more to you than just a dime. But it wouldn't take much if everybody was cooperative and really supported this ministry. So we're just going to see how this goes, and that's the direction the ministry is going now. Doesn't mean we won't have a mission church at some point in the future, but right now that is just not financially feasible until we get better and more consistent support. We've had good support over the years. It's just not very consistent. So we'll see where it takes us. But that's what's going on. Now, another thing that's kind of an interesting little story that Sister Mary Joan and I were talking about, and it's something that does involve the ministry, is that one of the things that we used to do, we would encourage you to send us your cursed objects so that we can eradicate them. People would sometimes have objects that they felt had attachments, haunted objects, objects that might have been around an environment that was cursed, and so there might have been some kind of negative attachment or malevolent attachment associated with that object. So they'd send them to us to get the object out of their possession, and then allow us to eradicate it. And I think if you've watched some of our Facebook Live streams, you have seen the containment cabinet that was at the Mission Church. It's actually still in the building. We haven't completely moved out yet. We just are not operational out there anymore. But, that was where we would keep the cursed objects. But now that the Mission Church is closing, we're losing our public address for that. So that particular service is on hold at the moment until we decide what we're going to do going forward. But there was a case that came in right before the Mission Church closed that involved a sigil that was forged out of blood that was wreaking havoc on the individuals that sent it to us. And so Sister Mary Joan quickly told these clients to get it over to us before the address is no longer valid. And she went to the post office today to pick it up, and it was the most brilliant story. So, Sister, I'll let you tell it in the way that you know best.
So originally this was delivered last week, and of course the bishop and I were in Sacramento, and Sister Maximilian is working. So they tried to deliver it twice, and there was no one there, so they took it back to the post office. There's no return address, so we knew it was going to sit there. So I had to go up that way for work today anyway, and so after work, I'm like, well, I'll go over and pick it up and take it over to the church and put it in the containment cabinet. But I didn't know where the main post office was because I'm not from up there. So I plug it into my GPS, and it takes me the opposite direction to a post office store. And so that didn't work out. So I'm like, well, maybe it's just my GPS is outdated. So I got on my phone and typed in the address again, and it took me the opposite direction of where I was, but still nowhere near where I needed to be. So finally I'm like, okay, I got you. And so I talked to somebody just on the street and asked them, where on earth is the main post office in Cartersville? And they gave me directions, and I knew exactly where I needed to go because we eat at the Longhorns over there quite often. And yes, the darn GPS. And so I finally get over there. I get there, and I'm like, all right, you're not winning, buddy. Because by that time I'm thinking, okay, this thing really doesn't want to be delivered. And the person that sent it said that they were having problems getting it to me, which is why it took so long. So I go in there, give them the tracking number. They go back into the back to try and find it. 3 minutes goes by, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes. And I hear them back there saying, I know it's here. It says it's here. And finally, the guy finds it, and it's on a completely different shelf from where it's supposed to be. So he brings it out to me. I get it, and I'm like, yeah, this one's going to be trouble. So I'm in an unmarked patrol car in uniform, and I pop the back of the trunk, lay it in there, and I just happen to have some holy water and holy oil with me. So I start splashing the heck out of that thing and making the little crosses in blessed oil on the box, on every side of the box, and saying my little prayers kind of under my breath. But by that time, I'm focused on the object, but I don't realize there's people walking by me in the parking lot looking at me all strangely. Here's this cop in the parking lot splashing water and yelling prayers at this box. What in the hell is going on? So I'm just kind of like, nothing to see here, folks. Slam the trunk down. I get in and I leave. So I gave somebody some entertainment this afternoon.
It's the police uniform that really finishes it off. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, we're here to protect and serve.
There you go.
Yep.
Oh, great. But yeah, we'll be having to handle that at some point soon.
Yeah, it's secure now. Yeah.
Good. Very good.
We got it in the cabinet, and it's sitting there just waiting for us to introduce ourselves.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's go ahead and get to some of these topics here tonight on this the remainder of the first segment here. And we've got many that came in today. I think probably that's the one we should start with. Now, we've talked about this before on this podcast, but I think every time a new Ghost Adventures airs, my followers go up by the thousands. And so there's always new people that are coming here and perhaps don't even know there was a podcast or don't even know what Vestiges After Dark is. They've never gone and looked at the archives and listened to past shows, so they don't really know what's been talked about and what's going on. So we get a lot of repeat questions. And one that seems to always come up and creates the greatest amount of controversy, ironically, is the subject of the retaining of ashes. Now, this is something that, was really unthinkable to me. And I cannot fathom the number of people who do this, where they keep an urn in the house with the ashes of a loved one. And I mean, I really didn't realize how prolific it was until I started really getting into this area of pastoral ministry, where we're solving, spiritual crises and trying to get to the bottom of what might have been the causations to these crises. And so I was really very surprised at how many people actually do this and think it's an okay thing to do. The fact of the matter is, as far as the Catholic Church is concerned, and I realize that not everybody's Catholic, but, this is, overall, I'm going to give a Catholic answer. Sometimes we will go outside of the Catholic box when there's a metaphysical question, a paranormal question, a philosophical question. We've never been afraid of speculation at my Twitter or any of my social media. That's always been, paramount to what we do. But when it comes to theology, I tend to give good old theological, conventional answers because, ultimately, in the end, I am Catholic, and I really don't teach anything that would violate Catholic doctrine in any way. There's a few minor things that we sometimes differ on, but it's nothing that would, be major doctrinal problems or cause major doctrinal problems by having these disagreements necessarily. But overall, the Catholic Church, which used to condemn the practice of cremation, has recently allowed it on the contingency that the body is intact during the funeral mass, and then the cremation happens after the funeral mass, and then immediately upon leaving the crematorium, the ashes are properly given the rite of Christian burial in a cemetery or an equivalent, location. Definitely, it is prohibited for Catholics to retain the ashes of a loved one. That is against Catholic teaching. So for Catholics, already that's not allowed. For Orthodox, cremation's not even allowed. Okay? If you're Eastern Orthodox, you can't even get cremated. It's not even an option. But Catholics have allowed it, but on the basis that the rites of Christian burial still practice, which means you don't keep the ashes, and you don't keep parts of the ashes. There's a reason for this, folks. There's a reason for this. The church, in its wisdom, understands, even though they don't necessarily talk about some of the spiritual consequences of this, it understands that there are valid reasons for why the church does what it does. Even in Hinduism, where you could argue that cremation as a ritual practice, or I should say a religious ritual practice, you might say Hinduism being the oldest religion that also practices cremation, would be one of the first. And they don't keep the ashes. They usually, the normal thing to do is to spread them into the Ganges. Okay? So, again, it's about releasing that spirit, ritually releasing that spirit. Somebody asked me today what that means to ritually release. That's what it means. It means that whatever religion that you practice, that you are ritually engaging that process of dismissal. You are setting that spirit free. Otherwise, there are problems. There are problems that can come up. There are consequences to retaining them. And some people think, but that's certainly not my animals. Yes, your animals too. And as I was saying on Twitter today, the more sophisticated the animal, the more likely there's an issue, which is why I say to people, typically when owners of dogs have the ashes of their dogs in the house, there's usually not any problems. Most people bury hamsters and other small animals in the backyard. There's usually not any problems. There's a reason for that, because the sophistication of their neurological system is of a lower caliber than some higher animals, primates, for example, which is why human ashes are such a problem, but also cats, which do have a sophisticated prefrontal cortex, which means that there has to be some limited sentience that cats possess that even dogs do not, because they do not have the same level of prefrontal neurological structure. So cats, and I'll tell you every single time that there's been pet remains that are the culprit in a paranormal disturbance, it is almost always a cat that is the culprit. Again, because they are a more sophisticated animal, which means they have a more sophisticated spiritual nature, and cats in general are more spiritual creatures. And so there's that aspect of it. So people were asking today about the nature of, what exactly is the risk? Why are they, what exactly is the risk of holding on to the ashes? Somebody said certainly the spirit is not being attached, isn't attached to the ashes. Yes, that's exactly what tends to happen in some cases, and I use the word some because I also got inundated today with people coming on Twitter and saying, I've had to bury my pets in the basement and I've never had anything go on. I have my father-in-law on this mantle and I've never had any problems. This is ridiculous. You got to do what's comfortable. And if it's comforting to have your family members with you, then you have, no right to tell people that they shouldn't do that. Yeah, I do have a right, because as a bishop, I took a vow to teach good and correct theology. And I am obligated to protect the spiritual integrity of the individual throughout the entire life, even into their afterlife. That's requirement of my job. Okay. If you don't like what I have to say, you're more than welcome to unfollow me, but don't seek me out to tell me I'm wrong, because you don't do my job and you haven't seen what I've seen and you don't know what I know. Okay. And we had some people like that today. People that don't even follow me coming on telling me I'm wrong. Who are you to tell me I'm wrong? Do you work in this field? Have you seen these things? Have you been doing this for more than 25 years? I don't think so. So it's a little irritating when it happens. So what exactly is the attachment? Well, with cats, cats, obviously, they have a spiritual nature that's more sophisticated than most animals that we keep as pets. There's the aspect that they are typically the animal of choice when creating a familiar. Okay. And so, again, the spiritual nature is sophisticated enough that people that are into those traditions will use them in that capacity. So that's another dimension to this to keep into consideration. And in addition to all of that, what we need to keep in mind is they can attach to us just as easily as we can attach to them. So when we talk about in the paranormal field an attachment, typically what people are thinking of is a demon latching on to you and almost like a psychic vampire, taking away all your energy. But that's just one type of attachment. We do the same thing to our dead that we mourn and don't let go of. It's one thing to mourn. It's important to mourn. It's necessary to mourn. Okay, that's part of the healing process. But the key word being healing process. Okay? It's not an excuse to forever latch on and not let go. It's not healthy for you, and it keeps them earthbound. So like I was saying, some people say, I've never had problems. Okay, good for you. But for every one of you that's never had problems keeping ashes in your house, I could introduce you to 100 more that have. People that didn't even realize that this was a problem. Okay, so we've talked about this before. I don't want to rehash everything we've already discussed, but I think it is important to make sure that it's understood that ashes need to be ritually released. They cannot be retained. It creates an attachment point, particularly that people that tend to be the kind that are going to keep ashes tend to be the people that don't want to let go. I had somebody come on today on Twitter and say, they're just ashes. It's just the shell, to be discarded. What's the big deal? Well, if it's just the shell to be discarded, then why are you worried about retaining them? Clearly, it's got to be more than a shell if you're holding on to them. Okay?
Yeah, if they're to be discarded, then discard them.
Discard them, exactly. Let them go. Release them. So people want to know how that's done. Some people actually, believe it or not, do listen to me. And so for those of you that do listen, this is what you do. Okay, so for a human being, hopefully, it was already part of the funeral process. If you are following proper Catholic doctrine, then you would have done it the correct way, which means that you would have, the person would have died. The church would have set the date for the funeral mass. The body would be intact at the funeral mass. The funeral mass would take place. Then after the mass, they would process out to the crematorium. Okay. Then the body would be cremated, and then the ashes would be collected and then brought to the cemetery for burial. Then the rite of Christian burial would be performed. That's the most ideal way to handle ashes. Unfortunately, a lot of people who do actually listen to me did not know about this until I started talking about it. And this was really kind of a shocker when they started seeing this on Ghost Adventures, where it became something that was a focal point in Sin City Exorcism, as well as in Ogden, although it wasn't. It was that was a part of the Ogden case. It just wasn't a prominent part of the episode, so I'm not sure a lot of people noticed that. But anyway, so a lot of people didn't know that this was not, that this is what you needed to do, and so now they want to know, what do I do with them? I've still got the ashes. I got this, but I don't want this to happen. I don't want to have this risk. So what do I do? So in those cases, what you would need to do is you could ask a Catholic priest if they could help you, get them blessed, properly buried, that type of thing. Of course, all that's going to cost money. A lot of people don't want to do that. They'd rather have paranormal problems or risk it than, put more money into a funeral. And to a certain extent, I can kind of understand that. But, let's remember what we are dealing with here. You are dealing with the remains of your loved ones, whether they are ashes or not. For as far as the spiritual nature is concerned, that is no different than a corpse. Okay? And most of you would be horrified at the thought of keeping a corpse in your house. But, a lot of you don't seem to have a problem with ashes, and spiritually they're the same exact thing. The fire does not change the spiritual nature. It only changes the physical appearance. Okay, so remains are remains are remains. And remains need to be properly dealt with to show respect to that family member and to help them to move on. This is something we don't do very well in the West. It's, in fact, something that we don't do hardly at all. We don't like dealing with death. And that's part of the reason why people form emotional attachments to their deceased loved ones and keep them earthbound. This is where a lot of hauntings happen. And another big issue that Sister Mary Joan and I can share from, I think you were still with us. I think you were with us, Sister Mary Joan, when this case came up. But we had a case where, a while ago, where there was a grandfather who had died. And they felt that he was still around. And at the same time, they were having all of these malevolent type experiences where they thought they had some kind of demonic infestation and wanted our help. Well, upon full and thorough investigation of the case, it was very clear that what had happened is the grandmother, who was still alive, the wife to the man who had passed on, was actually actively engaging him so that he wasn't moving on, did not feel that he could move on, and was basically trapping him in that house. Now, what happens when this happens? People are like, oh, it's Grandpa. So, he wouldn't do anything bad to us. He's keeping the bad guys away. No, he's not. Because guess what? Everything that you knew to be Grandpa is no longer grandpa once you start to cross into that realm of existence. It's a completely different ball game there. Okay? It's not the same situation at all. For those of you who do believe in reincarnation, think of it that way. If a person dies and reincarnates, and if you were to identify that person in their new form, you would not look at that body and say, oh, look, it's grandpa again. You wouldn't call him grandpa. You wouldn't treat him like grandpa. And it would be ridiculous for you to even do so. Because why? It's a new individual. It's not grandpa anymore. It's somebody new. Yeah, the energy's grandpa's, but it's not really him. Same thing goes with the spirit, okay? As the spirit is separated from the body, it starts to decay as well. And as it decays, it becomes less and less the individual that it was. And if it is in a state of being trapped, emotional distress, can't be released, then it starts to become malevolent. And this is what we call a wrathful spirit. This is how wrathful spirits are formed. This is where they come from. This is who they are. They are our deceased loved ones that we don't let go of. This is why it's paramount to properly rest ashes. It's why I'm not trying to make things up or be mean or, create havoc on social media so we can fight all the time. That's not my goal. My goal is to teach, to give something of my experience so that you have something that you can work with. And so, with this issue, what do you do when you did not have the proper funeral rites? So we left off at maybe seeing if a priest can help you. Now, if you can't do that, there are other things that you can do. You can release them yourself. The best thing that you could do if you still have ashes of a loved one is to take those ashes to a place where you feel that person in life would have been most comfortable. A place that would have made them happy. So if they like the ocean, well, you know what? Go and rent a boat for the day. Go out on the ocean and scatter them into the ocean. You can scatter them. The Catholic Church says you can't scatter. But I feel, and in my experience, and part of this is because I have a lot of experience in other religions, not just Catholicism, I have seen wonderful results from scattering. And this comes back to what ashes are really designed for, which was to toss them into the Ganges so that they could be carried into the spiritual stream, which the Ganges represents. It's a physical, corporeal representation of the river to the afterlife. It's a way of sending them on. So scattering is a wonderful way of doing this. Now, when you scatter ashes, you could also bury them if you want to be more inconsistent with what the church teaches, which is perfectly fine, and I certainly would encourage you to do that if you want to take those extra steps. Do not bury them on your property. That's just as bad as keeping them in your house in an urn. Again, find a place where it would be appropriate to do so, a place where they would find peace, but not somewhere where there would be trampling underfoot or a lot of activity. To give them a chance for rest, to release them if there is any chance that some of them remain. Some people don't. If they got enough grace, then they don't get stuck in their body, to their remains. It just doesn't happen. If there's enough grace, they move on, with or without primary conditions, with or without the proper, funeral rites, with or without family members who are either an aid or a hindrance to their moving on through emotionalism. Overall, if you've got enough grace, you're going to be good. If you are mindful enough, if you can die, as Buddhists say, with your eyes open, you're going to be fine, typically speaking. Okay? It's just for those people who die unexpectedly, traumatically, they're not ready to go. They're afraid of death. Their family can't let them go. They were not religious people, so they don't really have any kind of spiritual relationship or sophistication that can take them there. All of that is a factor that needs to be considered in this. I guess somebody who's been asking about relics is one of the questions that does come up is, what about relics in the church? And do they relate to spiritual disturbances? I mean, certainly I've got first-class relics. First-class relics, for those of you who don't know, are the remains of a saint. And I've got some of those in the chapel here in my home. I have a chapel in my home, private chapel, and where I say Mass, and I have actual body parts in there from saints. And so, some people say, well, how is that any different? Well, the difference is, by virtue of the definition of what a saint is when the church declares that individual is in the beatific vision in heaven, which means there cannot be any residual attachment to their corporeal form. Then you may say, well, what's the purpose of a relic? Well, it's because that person was so full of grace, which is what got them to heaven so easily in the first place, that grace actually still remains attached to the object. So typically people die in a state of despair and pain and distress and trauma. So all of that gets attached to the remains, and that becomes a demonic entity if it's allowed to cultivate. Okay, won't always do so, but in many cases, if the conditions are right, it will. But the opposite effect happens for saints, where, yes, there's residual attached energy, but it's actually all grace that gets attached. So it's a wonderful thing to keep around in those cases. Okay, so these are things it's a lot of complexity. And as you can see, this is not something I can go into on Twitter. There's just not enough time or characters to even answer some of these questions appropriately. But I thought this was something that, we needed to address again. So hopefully that helps you to understand what to do with human remains. So ideally, you want to have the proper rites performed in the order that I suggested them, through the Catholic faith. Without doing that, you can have a minister or a priest rest them with you in a proper location. You can scatter them. The Roman Catholic Church says no. I say it's okay. You can make your own judgment up about that depending upon where you stand, but I've never seen a problem with scattering. But what you're going to want to do is you're not going to want to just scatter. You need to ritually release a human being just to be on the safe side, if for no other reason. And for a layperson to do that, since you don't have the faculties of the priesthood, what you can do is the office of the dead. You can pray the office of the dead, something that is available to the laity. It's available in the Red Christian Prayer Book that you can buy on Amazon for like $25, $30. I think there's even a version of it online. You just find Office of the Dead and you can pray that while you are scattering the ashes, and that will be usually sufficient for releasing them. It's also a good idea to bless the ground with holy water as well. You can, if you can't find the Office of the Dead, or for whatever reason you just want to scatter them in a more simple way, it's also appropriate to scatter them and just simply pray the prayer, "Eternal rest grant unto them, O Lord, and let perpetual light shine upon them." Even that is enough of a ritual resting to be able to give them peace. And Joy Keeling in the chat room is saying there's an do you have the exact website? She had the link, Joy. That'd be great. There's an internet version of the Liturgy of the Hours that contains the Office of the Dead that can be used by any lay person. You do not have to be a priest to use this. And it's just as in most cases, unless it was a very severe, extreme situation, in most cases it will be sufficient. Now, somebody asked me about pets today. How do you ritually release a pet? Well, you really don't have to do much ritual for a pet. All you really need to do is scatter them or bury them in a place that's not on your property. A lot of people want to keep them close. That's going to be necessary, not an ideal situation. It's not the worst thing you can do, but it's definitely not going to be the ideal thing to do. What you would want to do is go and find, again, a place where they would find peace and happiness, and scatter them there, have a moment of silence, and you're good to go. Just don't take too much sadness back with you. Allow yourself to grieve, but don't dwell on it, and don't obsess over it. If you're grieving beyond 10 months, okay, and I'm giving you a very, I think, liberal figure. If you're grieving beyond 10 months, you need to start seeing somebody to help you along. You really do. It's okay to be sad. It's okay to think back fondly and have moments of tears, but it's not okay to obsess over it to the point that you think that by keeping their ashes in your home, that somehow you're going to be closer to them. You're just going to be attracting the risk of negative influences through doing that. Your grief is going to produce them. It will. Trust me on this. I have seen it happen over and over and over again. And I can tell you 9 out of 10 times when there is a disturbance like this, when we do a full investigation, turns out somebody's got ashes in the house. Okay? Think that should cover the subject. Sister Mary Joan, can you think of anything that I might have left out about this?
No, it's just I back up your play on that. The years that I've been involved with you in the ministry, that, I never thought that about ashes either until I started with you guys, and it really made a lot of sense of from people that I've lost in the past, where their friends or relatives or spouses, wanted to keep the ashes. A real close friend of mine passed away, and he was a tattoo artist. He was my tattoo artist. And something that's a new thing now is them wanting to mix the tattoo ink with the ashes and making tattoos. So you're literally tattooing your loved one's ashes into your skin, and that's just bad mojo. But that's something that's kind of popular in the tattoo world.
Yeah, and see, that's
I strongly advise against that.
We've already talked about tattoos and the natural risk of tattoos even without doing that, and how tattoos are essentially magical sigils. They come from shamanic tradition. They come from the old animistic spiritualities to embody, to imprint upon yourself the archetype, and so that you get that energy into you. And there becomes an enmeshment between you and the archetype, which actually changes your spiritual identity. It changes your spiritual DNA. Now, when you add into that mix the remains of a deceased individual, now you're creating a whole new realm of disaster. Because now you become an attachment point.
Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was ignorant, but I just knew something told me, no, you don't need to do this. But they had a tattoo party / wake for him, and they asked me if I wanted one, and something inside me said, "Don't you dare!" And so I'm glad I never did. So
I'm glad you never
now
did.
Knowing what I know now, I'm like, oh my God, thank God I said no.
Yeah, definitely. Although there's things that we can do to mitigate the effects if you had. It's best that we never had to go down that road.
You bet.
Okay, so that should cover it on ashes. I don't want to hear any more about it on Twitter, please. I'm not, you guys keep giving me your opinions, those that disagree with me on this. I know probably nobody listening tonight. It's always the people that don't listen to the show that are the ones that are giving me all the trouble. But, if there are some of you out there that disagree with this, look, I don't put this out on my Twitter. I'm not giving you this information on Spreaker to say, here, look at my opinion. You better believe in it. This is not my opinion. Okay. This is objective observation from somebody who works in spiritual problem resolution. What I have seen over the course of 25 years, more than that, actually. And this is the result. I don't have an opinion about it because I would never keep ashes anyway. But if I were the kind of person to keep ashes, I would still tell you shouldn't do it, because what I have seen and the havoc it has wreaked, unnecessary havoc on people's lives. Okay. If you want our help, you got to be willing to listen to us. And a lot of people, do that kind of thing to us and don't actually, they want us to come in and help them, but they don't want to do the things that need to be done in order to assure that it's resolved. And I want to see resolution. I want to see 100% resolution. I don't want to just fix it according to whatever your personal sensibilities are. I want to fix it according to the actual needs of the problem. Okay? So that's it. Hopefully that puts an end to it. And if you see anybody else asking questions about ashes, please give them the link to this broadcast once it archives. It usually archives within 5 minutes, not even 5 minutes after it airs, okay? So just get that link, keep it handy, and then tweet it out so that we don't have to have an inundation of questions about the same thing again. People arguing about ashes. Look, you're not going to win this fight with me. I've seen too much, and I've seen the problems that it can cause. Okay, so let's start talking about our next question that came in, and somebody had asked about Santa Muerte. Okay, this is a very common Mexican personality, spiritual identity, you might say. Saint Death is essentially what it is. It's sometimes referred to as Santissima Muerte or La Santissima Muerte. And it essentially is the personification of death. And so somebody wanted to know more about this because, Mexico obviously is a very Catholic country. And being a Catholic country, we might look at what they do in Mexico as being Catholic in nature. And so sometimes Protestants looking in would see them venerating a skeleton, and say, wow, those Catholics, they're really missing the boat. Look at how they worship this skeleton. Look how evil that is. So I want to clear up a few things. I don't know if there was a specific question about Santa Muerte, but I wanted to kind of give a general idea as to what this individual, for lack of a better word, deity is. First of all, let's set the record straight. The Catholic Church wants nothing to do with this, and they have already condemned the practice of worshiping or venerating Santa Muerte. Okay, so it's not a Catholic thing. It's something that Catholics in Mexico do, but it is definitely not an endorsement by the Roman Catholic Church by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, the Roman Catholic Church has considered it to be satanic. In fact, the rituals that are involved in the worship or veneration of Santa Muerte actually mimic the Mass. There's a different type of baptism that people practice with this Saint Death. And in some cases, people have left the Roman Catholic Church to join these churches of Santa Muerte, where they have their own liturgies, their own belief systems. And essentially what it is it comes back to more ancient tribal practice before Catholicism fully took over. But some of those ancient tribal ways sort of became enmeshed into it. We see this in the African Caribbean islands with Voodoo. You see it with Santeria in all of the Hispanic parts of the Caribbean, okay, where you see, deities or spirits. They call in Santeria, they're called the Orisha. In Voodoo, they're called Loa, where they have a name that is the same as a saint. And so they'll have like St. Peter. And they'll have a statue of St. Peter on their altar. And you might think, oh, look at this good Catholic home. It's got a statue of St. Peter. But it's not St. Peter to them. It's actually Papa Legba. Okay? And so this is something the Roman Catholic Church has always disliked. But it's just a part of what happens when you enforce your religious beliefs onto another culture. And, that culture is not going to ever let go entirely of their heritage. So this is essentially Mexican heritage, but it really only became popular in the 1950s and 1960s. And there's a few possible deities that Santa Muerte could have come from. The most likely one is an Aztec deity. I'm going to probably butcher this name, but hopefully I say it correctly. It's Mictlantecuhtli Mictlantecuhtli, which is the Lady of Death. I hope I said that right. And it is perhaps a modern manifestation of that Aztec deity, okay, where it sort of, became popularized with the celebrations in Mexico on the Day of the Dead. So isn't it ironic that Santa Muerte actually has two feast days in Mexico? One is November 2nd, which, as you know, if you're a Catholic, is All Souls Day, the day that we commemorate the dead, and August 15th, the Dormition, which is the day that the Virgin Mary was said to fall into her deep sleep and was assumed into heaven in the Roman Catholic Church. The Dormition is the name they give it in the Orthodox Eastern Church. And both of those have to do with death. In fact, Santa Muerte is recently taking on a feminine characteristic. And so now it's more of a feminine personality, or feminine spirit, and so some of them actually call her Our Lady of Death, and so it's, as you can see, something that could be provocative to a conventional Roman Catholic thinker, but to Mexican culture, it's essential. So I don't know what the person was getting at by asking me about this, but I wanted, maybe they were wanting my opinion on it. Essentially, what I think Santa Muerte is a spirit like a Orisha or a Loa, that has been elevated to a higher level. There might even be some loose associations with Saint Uriel, the Archangel, which is not venerated in the Roman Catholic Church, but is venerated in the Eastern Church. What essentially the popularity is that Santa Muerte will typically answer your prayers about things that the other saints would not. So, for example, let's say you feel that you have been, you're financially not doing too well, and you would like a new position. You could dress Santa Muerte in gold or yellow and invoke her for financial success. That's something you could do. You could also, if somebody wronged you, you could dress Santa Muerte's statue in black, give her an offering, and evoke her to protect you against this person and also get revenge against them. That's something that you would never be able to ask a conventional saint for. Santa Muerte, however, will do this for you, which is why I put her in the category. She's not a saint in the traditional sense. We're not talking about someone who died and entered into the kingdom of heaven. We're also not talking necessarily about a force that God, that works for God or under God. We're talking about a spirit that is closely associated with death, perhaps somehow has something to do with the processes of death, and this spirit is willing to do things that the higher spirits would not. And I say that very cautiously because I don't mean any disrespect to those that venerate Santa Muerte or Santa Muerte herself. Okay, but it is important to understand that there is a distinction here, and there is a extreme caution because when you start to look into some of the deeper practices involved in Santa Muerte and her veneration, it does start to look a lot more like witchcraft and a lot less like Catholicism. And so this is the separation point for the church and those in Mexico who do engage this practice. Is it a bad thing? No, of course not. I would never say it's a bad thing because I respect culture and I respect spiritualities that are different from my own. And, there is definitely much to be said about having a relationship with spirits that are not necessarily things that are identified in conventional Christian theology. And so, I think that these things need to be preserved for the sake of the cultures that they come from, the identity that is involved here. And so I respect it. I think, though, that a person would need to be very careful if they were to invoke Santa Muerte because anytime you are engaging in spirits that do not have the normal conventions that protect you, when, for example, if you're praying to Saint Anthony or Saint Peter or Saint Michael the Archangel, there's always going to be risk when you engage a high level spirit like Santa Muerte, who does in fact exist. It's an archetype, but still it's an identity. It is something that is sentient, and it's something that will communicate with you. It's something that will talk with you. It's something that will actually engage with you and do things for you if you honor it in the way that it wants to be honored, which is usually by leaving an offering. Another recommendation I would have for those of you who are going to engage in the veneration of Santa Muerte, if you're going to do it safely. And Santa Muerte does not typically like working with any other deities or any other spirits or even other saints except for Saint Michael the Archangel. That is one of the ones that it does tolerate very well. It actually works in sympathy with that one. There is also Saint Anthony and Saint Alina. These are saints that Santa Muerte does work in sympathy with, and they can help to protect you from the negative effects of working with Santa Muerte if you didn't do things correctly. Not something I'm saying that you should do this, but I do know a lot of you practice alternative spiritual faiths. And so I'm not here just for Catholics. I'm here to talk to you too, and I'm certainly not here to convert anybody. That's never been my goal. I want everybody to honor their spiritualities. If you appreciate mine, then you're more than welcome to come over and practice Catholicism with me. But I would never expect or would force that on you. But these are things that you should know before you get involved in this. I don't know. I mean, Sister Mary Joan, I know that it's something that's been a fascinating topic for you. Is there anything you'd like to add about Santa Muerte?
Yeah, it is a very powerful deity in some of the Mexican culture. I will say I worked Hispanic gangs for quite a while, and Santa de la Muerte was something that, and I'm not trying to diss on the saint, but in the drug community with the Mexican drug cartels, they venerate this saint, and there's another saint, I can't think of his name, but they would actually leave they would have an altar in the stash houses where we'd find hundreds of pounds of drugs. There was almost always an altar in one of the corners set up with those saints, and they would always have a $100 bill at his feet.
Interesting.
And that was kind of like their offering, and you did not touch that money. I had to teach some of the other officers that just leave that alone, because you just don't want the bad mojo. So that's when I first started to experience, and I started to study a little bit of Santeria a little bit more. And it's kind of like a protection thing for them to try and protect them from the police and from being killed by rival gangs or other drug dealers. So that was my experience, my first experience with Santa de la Muerte.
Well, it's an interesting subject, and it was a good question. I thank whoever it was that asked it. It was several weeks or months ago, but we wanted to make sure that we gave good credit to, or at least gave enough time to the subject, because there's a lot that can be said about Santa Muerte.
Joy just mentioned the other saint is Malverde. I think it was Jesus Malverde.
I got you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're at now the top of the hour, and so what we're going to do here is we're going to take a little break, and we'll be back shortly. Enjoy the music. And when we get back here, we'll be talking about, let's jump right into the Rosary and its mysteries after that Santa Muerte stuff. Don't go away.
pushing my limits and all the drive that I have. Well, I'm going the distance with you. I didn't know what I had till I knew what was missing, and everything that I dread. Well, I built a resistance with you. Catch me when I fall, and I'll keep you on the ground. You were gone, I wish you'd stay. I could look at you for days. Time was well spent, that's when I knew that I need to spend my life here with you. Fast lane, I understand that you've been broken too many times, but I'll be waiting to mend your wounds from all you've taken. But if we listen to each other and made our mistakes, then I can show you who I am, because I'm not the same. I'm better with you. I'm better with you.
Welcome back, everybody, to the second half of this edition of Vestiges After Dark. This is Bishop Brian Willett. I'm here with Sister Mary Joan. Sister Maximilian's in the chat room, and we are answering questions that have come in to us on social media over the past several weeks to months. Coming back here, we'll be talking about the Rosary and its mysteries, as well as mediumship, animal tarot, and numerology. We'll try to fit in as much of it as we can. You can also ask questions in the chat room if you like. We'll try to do our best to take those as well. Don't go away. Thanks, everybody, for staying with us through the break. And, one of the things that I think is the most powerful tool in spiritual problem resolution, and I think most of you who work with me in some capacity know this to be true, is the Rosary. A lot of people are always asking me if I can burn sage in my house, will it get rid of this thing or that thing? They want some kind of magic solution. They want some kind of potion that I can brew up for them and give them. But I can tell you right now, 99.99999% of the time, if you just spend some time with the Rosary, you would never even have these problems to begin with. That's how powerful it is. That's how helpful it is. So we talked about Our Lady of Death. Now let's talk about the actual Our Lady and her rosaries and the mysteries that they contain. And I think it's really important to also mention here that as a service to the church, Joy Keeling, who a lot of you know from this podcast, who would co-host with me on some of the episodes that we've had in the past. She is working on a very well put together rosary meditation that you can play and meditate towards. It's almost finished. When it is finished, we are going to air it on Nicolean Radio. Just the Rosary. It won't be a part of an episode or anything. It's just going to be the Rosary. There's 4 mysteries now. It used to be only 3. The church has added a 4th set of mysteries, and Joy is doing all of them and is only a couple weeks away from finishing. She also has some glow-in-the-dark rosaries that she's going to be donating that we're going to work out some way of being able to make them available through probably we've lost Sister Mary Joan. I don't know what happened here. But we're going to, I'll work on getting her back here in just a minute. But we're going to be working on getting hang on a second. She's coming back in here. All right, Sister, are you there? Sister? I don't know what's going on. We're going to try again here.
Hey, are you there?
Yeah, we lost you there. I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I just said, I lost contact. You just done. I'm back now.
Okay. Welcome to Skype.
Okay.
Yeah, so I get louder when there's no Skype. My sound is great. And Skype compromises the sound, and that's part of the issue. One of the problems we've had over the numerous times we've done this show. Hopefully, am I sounding good now? I hope. Let me know. But yeah, if we lose Skype, then my volume goes through the roof. But as I was saying before, the rosary that Joy is doing, she's going to have some glow-in-the-dark ones that we'll be able to offer probably on the website's shopping cart for a donation. They're going to represent a light in the darkness and something that you can perhaps use with the meditations when they are finished. I've listened to them, the ones that she has done, and they are absolutely fantastic. They are heartfelt. They are very, very meditative. She has tailored the music that she uses to the mysteries. Very well done. And so I'm very much looking forward to making these available through her kindness and the generosity of her time, so that all of you can better learn the Rosary, because it is truly the most powerful thing that we have in the arsenal against darkness. So let's talk a little bit about the Rosary here, so that we can get I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you. Joy will do that with you when we air the mysteries. But know that there's 4 mysteries now. There used to be only 3. And depending upon what day of the week it is, will determine which mysteries you celebrate. So on Mondays and Saturdays, you would celebrate the joyful mysteries, okay, which include the Annunciation of Mary, the Visitation of Mary to Elizabeth, the Nativity, or Christmas, depending upon which word you prefer. The presentation of the Lord and the finding of Jesus in the temple. Those are the joyful mysteries. As you note, they are all parts of, that involve Mary's relationship to Jesus. Scripturally, these are events from Scripture. So, those people out there that are very anti-Catholic can't say, we make all this Mary stuff up. No, it all comes from Scripture, whether you like it or not. There's some traditions that were non-scriptural that have been adopted, but understand there was a very strong apostolic tradition that existed outside of the canon, and that shouldn't be dismissed. There's nothing theologically wrong with any of that stuff. So there's that in there, but the joyful mysteries are what you celebrate on Monday and Saturday. So when you're going through the various decades of the Rosary, which are the 10 Hail Marys that you say between Our Fathers, moving to the next bead as you go through each prayer, you will be reflecting on those moments from Scripture. So the first 10 Hail Marys, you're going to be reflecting on the Annunciation of the Lord. On the second decade, you're going to reflect on the visitation of Mary to Elizabeth. You're meditating on this while you say the prayers. Okay, that's how it works. On Tuesdays and Fridays, you will say the sorrowful mysteries. Okay, so these are the moments from the life of Jesus and Mary that would have brought great sorrow to Mary, which is the agony of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, the scourging at the pillar, the crowning with thorns, the carrying of the cross, and of course the crucifixion. Both events are the carrying the cross and the crucifixion, where Mary was present for these. Okay, and she very well could have been present for some of the other events as well. It's to reflect on her sorrow and how she, as his mother, must have felt. Okay. Wednesdays and Sundays, you do the glorious mysteries. That's the resurrection of Jesus, the ascension of Jesus into heaven, the descent of the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, the Assumption of Mary, or the Dormition, August 15th again, and Mary crowned as Queen of Heaven and Earth, which is basically a reference from the celestial feminine archetype that you see within the book of Revelation. The church associates that with Mary, and rightfully so. Then, not too many years ago, the church decided to do the luminous mysteries, add the luminous mysteries for Thursdays. And these were ones that were not part of the traditional cycle, but have been now adopted. And the luminous mysteries are the baptism of Jesus in the Jordan, the wedding feast of Cana. Of course, Mary was present for that. The proclamation of the kingdom, the transfiguration, and the institution of the Eucharist at the Last Supper. In other words, these are the mysteries that bring enlightenment or spiritual enlightenment through those reflections. So that's the essential mysteries. The Rosary is a very easy thing to pray once you know what you're doing. On the cross, you pray the Apostles' Creed. Then there's a big, large bead that comes after it. That's an Our Father. Then there's 3 small beads. That's 3 Hail Marys. And then after the Hail Mary, you do a glory bead. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and will be forever, world without end. Amen. And then you announce the first mystery of whatever it is relevant to the day that you're doing it. And then the next bead is the Our Father, which begins the decade of 10 Hail Marys. And then you go through the 10 Hail Marys. You conclude the 10 Hail Marys with another Glory Be. And then you announce the second mystery, do an Our Father. You start the whole thing again until you get to the end of the 5 decades. Some monastic orders have a large 15-decade rosary to do all of the 3 original mysteries. I guess now they have to have a bigger one if they've added the 4th luminous mysteries, so that there would be actually now 20 decades to get through. But that's the general idea. And the idea of the Rosary is that this is a weapon against darkness. This is a weapon against Satan. All right, a very powerful tool. In fact, when we have exorcisms, we always have a prayer group that is praying the Rosary at the same time. It makes it extremely uncomfortable for any demonic presence to be, in the room when so many people are invoking Our Lady for the health of the victim. Okay. And yes, as Julie says, so much of Catholicism comes directly from Scripture, but anti-Catholics will have none of it. They just don't understand. They don't really get it. Okay. And it's unfortunate because, Catholicism is such a rich Christian tradition. It is truly the father of all Christian traditions. Okay. Sister Mary Joan, anything you'd like to add to that before we move on to the next topic?
No, I can just attest to how powerful the Rosary is, especially to have it in the background while you're doing the rite. And usually I'm the person holding the victim when we're doing an exorcism. And so I'm kind of doing my thing. And I remember Sister Max and Sister Elizabeth and Sister Kateri all doing the Rosary in the background just over and over and over again. And it was just very powerful to hear that in the background, knowing it was almost like having your backup right behind you. And they did it constantly throughout the whole thing. And I know it helped. It's
absolutely, truly the most efficacious thing that you could use. So, people trying to burn sage and all this, don't waste your time with that. Typically, you're not going to be able to do it properly anyway. This is something that will always work. Of course, there is relationship, just like as there is with sage. We got into that on Twitter this week too.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, I mean, just like if you're using sage, you have to have a relationship with the spirit of that element in order to effectively deploy the use of sage. But at the same time, the Rosary also requires a relationship with the Virgin Mary and and her Son Jesus Christ, but the difference between having to utilize or reach a spirit that is part of the elemental world, or something like the Virgin Mary or Jesus Christ, is that there's this unlimited compassion when reaching out to them, so that they work with you and they quickly reach out to you as long as you are open to receiving them. They will never force themselves upon you. So there's a lot of benefit, particularly within Western society, to using the tools that Western religion have given us, and that's one of the best. Somebody's asking, Tammy is asking in the chat room about my opinion on rapture. Okay, the rapture is a fabrication. It's a true heretical doctrine that was fabricated out of John Nelson Darby's made-up Christian doctrines that he was putting together in the early 1800s. There is no rapture. At any point, the fathers of the church did not teach rapture. It is pure nonsense. Okay, and there's a lot of theological complications to it, because the whole point of our life here is to be the church militant, to work out our salvation, to fight for our salvation and for the salvation of our brothers and sisters. And rapture is kind of like saying, you know what, I don't have to do that. Jesus is going to do it for me. Goodbye. That's not how it works, folks. Okay? Jesus is there to make possible the work, so that now your work can actually merit something, because otherwise you're too depraved to merit anything. So you need grace to do it. But now even our lowly works help to facilitate that relationship to salvation. We participate in our own salvation, and it is through the grace of the cross that now we can do this, because otherwise we would not be able to do what was necessary in order to reach salvation. But no, you don't get a free ride. You don't get a get out of jail free card. That's not how it works. You got to work out your salvation all the way to the very end if necessary. No, it's rapture is pure nonsense. Okay. Somebody was asking about mediumship. So I want to mention this. Gosh, this could almost be its own show, and perhaps it should be its own show. There's a lot that could be said about mediumship. And, I'm just going to pick one of the things about it that I think is the most pertinent to know. A lot of people might want to know, is it acceptable to be a medium, as a practicing Christian? Well, a lot of churches would say, no, that's not compatible. I mean, personally, I don't see any conflict there because true mediumship is a natural ability. Okay, it is something that, if you're really a medium, you didn't try to become one. You really do have this way to connect to spiritual forces, and that's God-given. So to say that it is not compatible with Christianity is to assume that somehow it's a dark talent, that somehow it was given to us, by Satan. I think there are some Christians that actually do believe that, but I want to make sure, that people understand that it is absolutely not some kind of sinful thing. Okay, not when it's properly utilized, when it's put in its proper place and understood for what it is. Now, if you're just trying to reach out through necromantic ritual to the dead, that's probably going to be a conflict with the Christian tradition. But if you're doing it in a sense that you've got a natural ability to sense things around you and to converse with spiritual forces that are in your environment, that's kind of natural. And, it would be ridiculous to assume that came from some kind of satanic force. And I reject any opinion that it would be that way, because I've worked with mediums, genuine ones, and I know that, we're not dealing with something satanic here. Mediumship can be used to help people. But it's also important to understand what it really is. And this is where a lot of people do not really get it. Because the idea when you think of a medium is that you are, somehow through your natural ability, you're able to talk to those that have passed on. So you have these people that even make money doing this, where they, I don't know, what's his name? What's that guy, Sister Mary Joan, that did the show for a while? Edwards, is it Jonathan Edwards? Is that his name?
Brown hair, mustache.
Yeah, you got people that use mediumship that way.
Edwards.
That's questionable. If he wants to do it, fine. I'm not a fan of that kind of, use of mediumship. And there's a lot about it that I have reservations about. It's a lot of cold reading, and I don't really respect that. But, there are people that do have a genuine gift. I'm not saying he's not genuine, but, I would have to work with him to know, and I've never met the man, so I don't really know. But that's it's a big name, and, it's become more of a show than it is therapy or an aid to people. But what is true mediumship? I mean, are they really transversing the veil and talking to those that have passed on? That's not quite how it works, okay? And the same thing goes with EVP, ovilus communication. Anytime you're getting communications from what are typically understood to be voices from the dead, and there's going to be a lot of people out there that disagree with me, and that's fine. Look, I'm not trying to share. Let's make this very clear. Okay. I'm not sharing this as a personal opinion. Okay. I am giving you a observation that I have made, and I have formed an educated model based upon those observations. Okay, this is what I have been able to witness working with mediums, experiencing some of it myself, because the more you do work in the paranormal, the more sensitive you become to it. Okay, so I'm telling you this from that frame of mind. I'm not giving you my personal opinion right now. Right now, I'm giving you an observation I have made through my professional work. And this is what I have been able to derive is what mediumship is, which is the same as EVP communication, which is the same as ovilus communication, or any other kind of spirit communication, including mediumship through the Ouija board. Of course, the Ouija board has some other things going on with it that we don't have time to get into. We've also had other shows on that, so we really don't need to get into it. But I want to make sure that this is understood. Okay. Mediums do not really communicate with the dead. What they communicate with is the residual content that the person left behind when they died. The thing is about this, and you might say, but no, that can't be, because they know things that they didn't know in life, or they're able to tell things that are happening now. It's very hard to explain how this works, but understand that the cosmos itself is sentient. It's not just intelligent organic life like human beings. Everything is sentient in its own way. Their awareness is a natural quality of the cosmos itself. So everything that touches the ether that makes up this universe is an interaction of sentience. So when you die, okay, energy is released. That energy becomes an imprint, typically in the environment, sometimes attached to a person, sometimes attached to the remains, sometimes just to the ether itself, or where it follows around energy that is familiar to it. Not quite an attachment, but accessible, which is why you could bring a medium. You could go see a medium, and the medium might be able to communicate with your dead grandmother, and your dead grandmother's telling you something, and you're like, well, this is amazing. Obviously, he connected. Well, no, what he connected with was the residual energy that is still circling around you. That was left behind. And because the cosmos is sentient, it can animate that content, that data, and you can have a conversation with it, just as you did in life. And in a way, and I really hesitate to say this because without more metaphysical training, it's really hard to explain what I'm about to tell you. So just take it for face value right now, because I don't really have time to go into the particulars. Your mind is the same thing. You really are just a projection of energy that is contained in one spot, attached to your brain for the moment, and you're able to have an intelligent, interactive dialogue with others through that same process. The fact of the matter is, what makes a medium special is that they can connect to and hear that ethereal data. They can download that data, interact with that data, ask that data questions, and get accurate answers. That's what mediumship really is. They're not really talking to dead relatives. They're really not talking to dead spirits. They're talking to residual energy systems, which is the same thing as what EVP essentially is as well. Okay? I know that's not going to be a popular opinion. All right? And it's not even an opinion. It is a direct observation that I have made through, again, more than 2.5 decades of this work. I was doing EVP long before there was ever a paranormal show on television. More than a decade before. I don't tell you this to burst your bubble, but this is essentially what it is. You are talking to the cosmos. You are talking to the intelligence of the universe itself. Okay? So, that's what mediumship is. I mean, there's so much that could be said. And maybe we need to do a show, Sister Mary Joan, on mediumship so that we can kind of go into all of it. But I want to make sure that people understand when I talk about mediums and why and why this is important. You might say, well, why did you need to tell us that? Why did you have to ruin it for us? I'm going to tell you the reason is because I know that there's going to be a lot of conventional Christians and Catholics that are going to jump down my throat for saying, you should not be endorsing mediumship, or you shouldn't be telling people that's okay. I want them to know why I think it's okay, because it's really not necromancy. Necromancy is a whole different thing. Necromancy is literally conjuring, trying to resurrect spiritually a person that is no longer alive. That's very different. That's what the Witch of Endor did in the scripture. Okay. Mediumship is not that. Mediumship is just tapping into the energy that's already there and having an exchange of data with it. Okay. I don't know if you guys have questions about that. If you do, Sister Maximilian will let me know. But you know what? You know, I saw you, Sister Mary Joan, talking about the animal tarot. Why don't you go into that? Why don't you talk about what that is? Somebody was asking you. I think they heard you talk about it on a previous show, and people wanted to know more about it. So why don't you go ahead and share what you know?
Well, they're tarot cards just like any other deck, only these tap into more of the animal spirits or the totem animals. The deck I use is simply called Medicine Cards. It's an older deck, but it served me well, and it's made by Baron Company Publishing. It's also a companion deck to Sacred Path card deck, which is of the same company. You can do mixed readings with them both for more advanced readings. But basically, it gives you, let me see, several of the well-known, what I would call power or totem animals in the deck. There's like 44 in this deck, but you also have, there's some blank ones you can add on your own. And basically, each animal has been given a lesson to teach us. Animals are our companions. We were given rule over them. But, you know, God himself has used animals as messengers, doves and ravens. It's very common throughout many religions as well that animals are messengers to teach us what we need to do in particular situations and how we need to center ourselves and humble ourselves to receive spiritual teachings. And I've used the deck in quite a while, but I used to use it quite often when I was having a real stressed out situation, whether it be at work or my personal life. And I found it very intriguing how I would lay out a certain spread, read the interpretations, and it would be dead on every time. Mm-hmm. And it also spills over into the physical world where you need to pay attention to animals you come in contact in your everyday life. You know, I think I've mentioned this before, where if you see a particular animal or insect or creature in a place where you wouldn't normally see them, and, you know, it's like if you're walking down a street and there's a turtle in the middle of the street, that's not usually where they are, it's speaking to you. Not to mention it may be asking you to pick it up and get it to the other side of the road safely.
Which Sister Maximilian will tell you I have done on numerous occasions. Turtles and I have a nice relationship.
I've done it in my patrol car, blue lights in the middle of the street, and people watching me get out and pick up a turtle, and I'm like, hey, I got it, no problem. So
you're lucky you got the lights. I don't have the fancy lights.
Yeah, I had the lights. But,
I got to risk my life to save theirs.
That's right. But like just the other day, I was actually going to my backwoods when, we had a pretty intense investigation with the Ghost Adventures guys, and I had used Sunday for kind of my grounding session just to get my energy back and get back grounded. I went to my backwoods to go do the Rosary by my creek, and I ran across not one but two turtles in the woods. And we haven't had a lot of rain down here in Georgia, so I'm like, you know what, I bet you they're going to the creek. So I picked up both of them and took them under each arm and took them down to the water. And with some of the emotions I was feeling, you know, I kind of reflected on, okay, well, why do those turtles show themselves to me? And, you know, turtle medicine is all about finding your center and reconnecting to the earth. And that's something I was actually on the way to do. And it teaches you to slow down. Everybody knows the story of the tortoise and the hare, and to just reflect on who you are and your place in the world. And so I took that to heart before I started the Rosary down at the creek the other day. And that's one thing I love about Nicolaitan Catholicism is that I can still hold on to my shamanistic past, and it blends perfectly with Catholicism.
Yeah.
And I use them both interchangeably, and it works out fine. But these cards, there's several different spreads you can do, and I always use a barrier. I use a rabbit pelt, and you just hold the deck in your hands, and you shuffle them just like a regular deck, and you think of your intentions, and you have to humble yourself. That's one thing you need to do if you're going to connect to the spiritual world, and especially to the animal kingdom. You have to humble yourself. Ask permission to enter that realm, and ask permission to speak with them, and ask for their advice.
Yeah.
And if you truly humble yourself and let all your ego go, you'll be surprised at the answers you get. And I'm telling you, every time it gives me the answers I need. And if you follow up with it, you'll feel better for it. And if you don't, sometimes they'll come in the physical world and show you, hey, I'm talking to you again. Remember last time we spoke? Like I see dragonflies all the time, and dragonflies is all about transformation and change. And it's reminded me of things I needed to change in my life. And
right.
They kept coming around until I made that change. But it's another tool that can be used to get some of the answers you may be trying to get that you can't get conventionally. But again, it's got to be done with respect, and it's just like any other tool you use with the spiritual realm. You've got to respect it, know what you're doing, and let go of your ego and just let them speak to you. And they will speak to you through the cards and in real life. You've just got to listen.
Yeah, I'm actually, when I teach my students about tarot, which is, again, a peculiar thing for a Catholic bishop to be teaching anybody. I always explain to them that, it's about developing a relationship, and once you've achieved that relationship, you'll never need the deck, because the cosmos itself comes alive. It will speak directly to you. You will hear the voice of God. You won't need these limited tools in order to do that. So I tell people all the time when I teach them tarot, if I'm any good at my job at all, when we finish this class, you won't need your tarot deck anymore. Mm-hmm. It's really just a template to get you started. And I think that works very well with what you're talking about with the animal tarot, because, so much of that is based upon the spirit guides and animal guides and shamanism, where, the traditional way of making these interactions is by literally going out there into nature and connecting. But in the beginning, it's nice to have a tool like the tarot that can sort of guide you into it and give you the archetypes that you're working with, which is actually a good lead into the next question here about numerology. Because people were asking about numerology, and again, that in itself is more than a show. I mean, we in the webinar that I teach, that was oh my goodness, Joy Keeling, if you can remember how many weeks that class lasted, that unit rather on numerology. I want to say that was several months where we covered the subject. So there's a lot to learn about numerology, and I can only really have time to say a few things, but it sort of relates to what we're talking about here with the archetypes and the various ways in which they reach out to us through tools like tarot. Numerology is about really discovering what primary archetypes make up your aggregate structure. We call it an aggregate structure because it's made up of several different archetypal patterns that sort of come together and create an identity. Joy says it was more than 10 weeks. And yes, I agree. I think it was definitely it was a very long, at least 10 weeks, but I know that we did some praxis too. So, essentially what it is you're trying to find the components of your aggregate structure to find what primary archetype is influencing your existence. And so numerology pretty much works to find your personality vibration, your soul vibration, and your destiny vibration. And you do that in different ways by calculating certain aspects. So like for the soul vibration, you're basically calculating the numerical value and reducing it down to one number of your full name. Okay, which means that your soul vibration can change with the different identities you assume in your life. Like when I became Bishop Brian, and now because I'm on television and millions of people know me as Bishop Brian, That's now an identity. That's now a new soul vibration that has changed my aggregate structure, because now it has a life of its own in the consciousness of others. So that's something that can change. But there's other ones that are fixed, like the the archetype that rules a particular location. As long as that address doesn't change, then that will always be the same archetype that rules that location. Same thing with your life lesson number. Your life lesson number is fixed because that's the breakdown of your birth date. Your birth date doesn't change. So it would be a lot to get into in a show like this, to kind of, go through all of the specifics of numerology, but understand that's really what it is. Numbers hold certain archetypal values. They are they resonate at a certain frequency, and that frequency helps to determine how the things that are associated with it through relationship and sympathy actually end up playing out. So, certain days are going to resonate. Certain numbers resonate with other numbers. Like, for example, the number 2, 4, and 7 are compatible with 6 and the numbers 2, 4, and 7 are compatible with each other, but incompatible with 6 and 9. Like number 2, for example, is compatible with 1 and 7, but incompatible with the number 5 and 9. Okay, the number 3 is compatible with 6, 8, and 9, but incompatible with 4 and 7. And so, depending upon which frequencies are compatible, it will help you to understand which days, if you spend the time reducing down the numerical value to find the archetype that rules the day, you'll know which days are good days for you to do things and which days are not good days for you to do things. There's days where you're going to be incompatible with the day that you're on, so that's not a day to start something new. So that's how you basically use numerology. Harley's asking if tarot is a sin. Well, it depends upon who you ask. Divination was certainly against Levitical law, but we kind of rose above that, didn't we? When Jesus pretty much fulfilled the law and bound us to only two. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and your brother as yourself. We're not really bound to much laws anymore. And so, while the Roman Catholic Church certainly considers any form of divination a sin, because it considers divination a means to seek hidden information without appealing directly to God, that by its very nature is contrary to the true essence of what divination is. Again, it gets into the confusions that exist within Christianity that assume that anything that is of an occult nature has to be coming from Satan. That is simply not true. In fact, the entire, esoteric Christian tradition is ultimately part of the conventional system. Much of the theology and the mysteries of the church are a type of occultism. It's not the occultism or the occult aspect of it that makes it a risk or a danger or a sin. It's the utilization of it and what the intent is behind it. Personally, true divination, as the ancient Jews saw it, because believe it or not, the ancient Jews did practice divination. Okay? They just had one form that they used. Only the priests could do it, but that was an acceptable form because it was appealing directly to God for the information. Okay, but obviously going to a witch who was maybe appealing to evil spirits. Not that all witches do this, of course they don't, but there are witches that do only work with evil. I've known them, so I know that they exist. And if they're appealing to evil spirits or demons to get information, that would be a sin. Understanding that divination, though, is ultimately a conversation with God if it's done in the correct spirit and with skillfulness. I mean, certainly an average person walking off the street, going into a bookstore to buy a tarot deck, is probably going to be committing a sin with that deck because they don't know what they're doing. They're opening themselves up to forces that they do not understand and they are not properly trained to handle. But if a person has gone through those proper trainings, as the ancient Jews did, which is why divination was acceptable for the priesthood, at least that particular kind of divination, same thing goes with tarot. So I do not, I do not at all understand tarot was actually created by Christians. Okay, it was actually created. The earliest decks are basically the life of Christ in iconography. You know, a lot of these superstitions that we've created in the modern era are because people have forgotten the origins of these things. You know, and it's unfortunate that it's that way. I would never tell anybody to go out and get a tarot deck unless you are training with me, where, you know, I would be able to give you the proper precautions. And let me tell you, any of my students who might be in the chat room right now, I know Joy Keeling is one of them, they will be the first one to tell you it's a painstaking, grueling process to learn this stuff from me. We go through it very methodically, very slowly. We are now on class 106. We just finished class 106 today. Each class is a minimum of 1 hour, sometimes 2. Some of them have even been 2.5. Occasionally, we might have a short class if I'm having to get out of there quickly. But overall, I mean, that's at least 106 hours of content. So that in and of itself should show you the kind of care that's necessary in order to engage in something like that. Any other things here? I want to say that I know somebody was asking about hair, keeping a lock of hair. We're almost at the end of the show, so I'm going to leave you with this one. You saw in Ogden, you saw in Sin City Exorcism on Ghost Adventures, the dangers of keeping a lock of hair. Understand that every atom contains the fullness of your beingness. Whether you burn it or not, the only way to separate that beingness from the corporeal identity and the matter of each particular atom that makes up your body is mindfulness, the skillful mindfulness to be able to separate. And most of us don't have that unless we go through many years of metaphysical practice. So therefore, that's where grace comes in. And that's where the church has the tools to assist you with breaking those connections so that you do not get stuck and end up haunting someone one day. But overall, understand that any part of the body contains the fullness. This is a very basic esoteric principle. Any witch out there that's worth her value knows what I'm talking about. Okay, this is why you can get fingernail clippings or locks of hair and use them in ritual spells, because it's in sympathy within the individual. Okay, there's a relationship that you're trying to cultivate there and utilize and manipulate. Okay, so it's never a good idea to retain any body parts. Okay, so some people might say, well, what about a lock of hair from your baby? Well, that is probably the most benign way. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, but it is the most benign thing that you could do. Okay, that's most likely not going to cause much issue because so much change happens between infancy and adulthood that the individual that they become is nothing similar to the lock of hair that you took when they were infants. And so there's really not much attachment or connection remaining there. So that's typically a safe one. But, keeping the lock of hair of a loved one, you break up or the person dies and you still got their hair, that becomes problematic. Same thing with ashes, okay? It becomes the same type of thing. So that's where we're at. My goodness, we're at the end of the show. And Sister Mary Joan, I want to thank you so much for being here and sharing your insights. Yeah, definitely. We'll if we get out of the Mission Church work tomorrow that we have to do there, let's have a cigar. How about that?
Sounds good to me. Yeah, it's going to be a relatively short night. But yeah, it was really good to talk to everybody again. Really good to have another podcast. Hopefully there'll be more on the horizon with less time in between.
We'll do our best to get another one out here really soon. If you got topics, be by all means, let us know on Twitter. You know, we typically draw from the big questions, the good questions that we get out there. You know, but keep it civil. Understand, I'm not out there to debate. I'm not out there to share my opinions. And I really am not out there to promote your opinions. I'm out there to share the best models that we have available to us to understanding these things that we call the paranormal. Vestiges After Dark as a podcast is built upon that principle, and overall I want to maintain the dignity of that exercise, because too much nonsense exists within the paranormal. There's too many charlatans, too much fraud, and really we need to work together to make it a respectable field, because there is so much authenticity there. It's just, you know, not enough of us out there doing it the right way. Anyway, this is Bishop Brian Willett, Sister Mary Jones, Sister Maximilian saying good night, God bless, and we will see you next time on Vestiges After Dark. Good night, everybody.